Alright, so I'm going to show you how to put together one of these sticks. Got all the parts in front of me here. This is the stick base, standard 2-button to 10mm diameter buttons, which all the sticks should have that. There's the stick back panel just to cover up all the insides. I've got the faceplate 1 for the standard diamond head here. See, there's a hole for the 10mm button, same as those ones. And I've also got 2 spots for these little hats. You can see they're little 5-way hat switches. They go every direction as well as down. And what we've got here is a little arm which just goes behind and holds those hat switches in. We've got a bunch of 8mm M3 screws. Going to need a hex key. And you're going to need pliers. That's a 2.5mm hex key. So over here, these are just caps for the hat switches. And there is my 4-pin aircraft plug, and that'll go down the bottom, and that's how we'll connect it to the rest of the system. So let's get all this gear out of the way. And let's start with the stick. And we're just going to give him this. Now this may have to be forced in a little bit, so make sure you take the nut off. And it slides in through the bottom. Now there's a little key on there. There's that key. Now make sure that goes towards the back. Basically facing towards you, where you'll be sitting when you're holding it. Now this is designed to be a little bit tight, so I'm going to get that in position and just turn it over and then press it down. You may have to jiggle it a little bit, but that's it. There might be a little bit of wiggle, and now what you want to do is get that nut on to hold it. So just get it finger tight. If it goes on a little bit cross-threaded, you may have to back it off to balance it out and then put it back in. And then just get your pliers. Do get this one as tight as you can. If this comes loose, you might get a little bit of a left and right jiggle when you're playing. Nothing too bad, but better if you get that tight. Alright, now let's do our 2 10mm buttons. So they're going to go right there. And so the first thing you do is just take the little nut off, slide him in from the back, now once again, due to printing not being 100% accurate, you may find yours a little bit tight. You may have to turn it and screw it in yourself, or even get out the Stanley knife and scrape open the hole a little bit bigger. But get him in, tighten him up, give it a couple of turns with the pliers, just so he's not going to wiggle loose, and that's it. Now you see I've made it so the pins are sort of next to each other like that. Keep it like that, it'll make the wiring a little bit neater later. That one went in pretty easy. And then just the final tightening with the pliers. Beautiful. Alright, now let's do the head. So I'm going to do the diamond head here, and all the different heads are pretty similar. So first I'll put in my switches, which work exactly the same. Just slot them in, put the nut on, now for this particular one, there's actually a problem where it doesn't quite fit. You see it hits the back of the diamond head there. So the way we fix that is we just bend those two little legs back a little bit. So don't have to bend them too far. Definitely make sure they don't touch. But once you've got that in and bent the back, you can tighten him up, and now he'll fit perfectly. All right, onto the hat switches. Now, when you put these in, notice the leg pattern. See, they've got two legs higher up, and then the bottom leg is spaced out a little bit more. And that's where we want to put it. So legs to the outside, and the two closer legs are going towards the top. And that'll just make wiring a bit easier if they're all facing the same direction. So he should press in. Like I said, you may have to get out the knife and just scrape those holes open a little bit. But should fit in nicely. Get the other one, and same deal. All right, now prevent these falling out. Oops, let me just tighten that a little bit. Yeah, see, mine didn't fit quite perfectly, so I'm just going to scrape a little bit of extra plastic out of there, just to make sure it goes in all the way. And part of the problem is we want it to fit exactly right and still be held there a little bit, not fall out being loose. You see, now I've got the problem where if I press it, it can fall out. So that's what this little backing piece is for. And like I said, if you've got the big head, you'll have a slightly different one to hold it in. But it works exactly the same way, it's just a different shape. So pretty easy to get these in reverse, but only one way does it actually cover up the hole. So flip it around a few times until it covers the holes, then you're good. What I'm going to do, because these plastic holes, the way they work is they're just a little bit too small for the screw. Just to make it easy for myself, I'm going to just push this screw in just to thread it and cut that thread into the hole. It's a bit easier to do it without the plastic thing in the way. Make sure you push hard in as you turn the first few, but then you'll find it'll grip and pull its way through. So now we've threaded that hole. And it'll just make it a little bit easier. Now when I do this, it'll screw straight in. I won't really have to do that push and turn thing again. Now the other important thing is to make sure you don't over tighten these, because you've got a lot of leverage with this little hex key. If you keep turning, you will actually just drill out that hole and the screw won't hold anymore. Get it straight, tighten him in. That's it. I'm not going to tighten this one all the way yet. Let's get all the screws in. Oh, and you see what I've done? I've actually not paid attention. I've put it in the wrong way. You can see that middle hole doesn't line up. So let's quickly fix that. I'll decide later if I'm going to edit this bit out. Just flip him over like that. Now you see all the screw holes line up. So once again, don't tighten these ones too much yet. Let's just get them all in. Because these are not meant to be super tight. They're just meant to put a little bit of tension on the back of those hats so we don't push them through. Yeah, whenever you're doing screws into this 3D printed plastic, you always have to make sure you don't over tighten them, because you will just drill out those holes. I mean, they can handle a fair bit of tightness, don't worry too much. But yeah, if you treat them like they're made of metal, you will definitely drill them out. You can see I'm not really making these super tight, just enough that they're just pressing on those hat switches. And then when you press on the hat switch, you should find there shouldn't be any wiggle. That's perfect. So they're not going anywhere. Let's tighten that one up a little bit. A good way to make sure they're all the same tightness is just look underneath the screw heads and make sure there's no gap. And same thing with that switch, just make sure the nut's in properly. And let's thread these holes here. These are the ones that are actually just going to hold the faceplate down to the diamond head. And it's going to be a bit easier if we pre-thread these holes. They're actually a bit easy for me here because I have already pre-threaded these ones. So he fits in there like that. And you see that all fits nicely now. And then 2 holes for these screws, and they just go in like that. Now feel free to skip this step because I'm going to pull this apart in a little bit to do the wiring, but I'll show you how to put it together all here first. So once again, don't over tighten. That's it. So let's pull that apart again instantly. Alright, so now let's actually put it onto the stick. So there's a little lip on there, so when you put it on, you've got to sort of put it on towards the front first. You can't go straight on. So just hook that on. That's it. That little angled bit of plastic there just helps it stay on nice and tight and not move around. So screw these in. So I've already done these holes in the past, which is why it's quite easy. You might have to tap them first, just run a screw through to get the thread going. And it's the same for every screw you see me doing today. So you should have a nice clean edge there. And now the faceplate can go on the correct way. And that's it. And I'm going to put the screws in again. But of course we're going to have to take them out again when we want to do the wiring. Let's just get the whole thing built and see how she looks first. Now the hats should press on. But once again, this is one of those things where they fit quite snugly. So if you find it doesn't fit, just get the knife and scrape open that hole a little bit. But they should fit on fairly easily, not be loose and falling off. So once they press on, they should stay on really well. And they should slide down, I think it's about 1 millimeter or so. And then the faceplate goes into the bottom, goes in there, and then 2 screws. So every screw in this is an 8mm M3. There we go. And that's how to actually make the stick. And then this is plug on the bottom. He's going to plug straight into one of our gimbals there. So he'll plug in like that. You may find it jiggles a little bit, but that's what this little nut is for. So get that finger tight. And once you're sure you're going to keep it there for a while, you probably just want to grab the pliers and do that last little bit of tightness. Don't over tighten these, but you do want to keep it, tight enough. And that's it. All right, so I'm just going to take him off again. All right, now I think it's time to actually wire this guy up. So let's move on to the next step. All right, let's pull him apart first. Okay, so I'll start by showing the schematic for those who want to skip ahead without me. And then after I've shown this, I'll go ahead and do it all and demonstrate it. But here's the schematic. So first of all, you want your Arduino for a micro, and there is one of your hat switches up the top left. And you'll see we've got the grouped pins towards the top, and then the little pins by themselves towards the bottom. Now the only pin we really need to specifically map out is that ground pin, which is the top right one. And that ground pin connects to one of the ground pins on our Pro Micro. There's 3 ground pins on the Pro Micro. You can connect to any of them. I'm connecting to this one, which is off to the side, out of the way. Now the other 5 pins, which are all the directional button pins, they can go to any of our digital pins. Now skip 2 and 3. 2 and 3 are our communication pins. So start with 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now once you've got those, we can move on to the second hat switch. Now this guy, same as before, we do the ground wire, and the ground wire can actually be bridged, so they can all be connected together. You can connect the ground to the ground on the other hat switch. You can run a separate wire all the way down to the Pro Micro. Doesn't matter as long as all the grounds are connected. And the other 5 just to our next available pins. So I'm going 9, 10, 16, 14, and 15. Leaving us only A0 through A3 left. Now we've got our 3 buttons. We've got 1 on the head and 2 on the grip. And the buttons are a little bit simpler. They have 2 pins each. One goes to ground and the other to a digital pin. It doesn't matter which one, both pins are identical. We'll do all the ground wires, and once again, they can all be tethered together, or if you like, you can run a separate ground wire for each switch all the way back down to the Pro Micro. But it's usually better to bridge them in some way to save you a bit of mess inside. And then the 3 digital pins, and I'm going to go to A3, A2, and A1, leaving me with just little old A0 if I ever want to add anything else. So I'll just reiterate once again, keep 2 and 3 clear, because the 2 and 3 are our communication pins, which you can use if you're only using one Arduino Pro Micro, but since we've got one in the base, talking to this one, that 2 and 3 is what the 2 Pro Micros are actually going to communicate with. So when we connect that aircraft plug, and let's do that now. So here is the aircraft plug as we see it from inside the stick. You can see I've got the little tab down the bottom there. And then what we do is we put in the 4 wires just like so. I'm going to give you this little schematic as well for the aircraft plug, which shows all the different angles and how you would wire it from each side, if that helps. All right, let's move on and do the real thing. Okay, so I've got everything disassembled and ready to go. I've got my Arduino Pro Micro here. Now there's no real good place to mount the Arduino Pro Micro. I left it like that. Number 1, probably out of laziness, but number 2, because sometimes we want to try and use a different microcontroller, and if I'm building mounts in there, then they're going to get in the way sometimes. So what I'll say is either pack this in and leave it loose when we're done, or else what I usually do is just put a little spot of hot glue. But don't do any of that now, because first we have to wire everything up, and we don't want them glued in when we're wiring. So the first thing we need to do is get all our wires. So have a few different colors if you've got them. It's usually good to use black for ground and use some different colors for your digital pins, because we're going to have, what are we going to have, 5 for each hat switch and 1 for the switch. So there's going to be a lot in the end. So first thing we're going to do is cut all our wires. So just roughly measure them to the right distance. Give yourself a little bit of extra leeway, because it's always better to have them a bit too long than too short. But let's go ahead and clip a bunch of wires. Alright, so a fair bit of time later, we are ready to start soldering. So I've got one ground wire here, and I've probably got that a little bit long there. Let me just trim that a little bit. Alright, so what I'm going to do is use my tweezers just to bend this, so it's going to sit parallel as possible with the actual pin I'm aiming for, which is that top right ground pin. Just like that. Now it's worth getting it ready first, because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time heating these up. They're pretty good at handling heat, but of course if you keep them hot for too long, there's a decent chance you'll cook the inside. So just get this in position. I'm putting the tweezers on there just to hold it in place. I've got my little soldering iron. And we're just going to move in, heat it up, feed in a little bit of solder, move it away. And if you've done well, you should have covered it with a nice little blob of solder. Let's have a look. Give it a little tug. Yep, he's good. Now there's better ways to do this. You could actually wrap the wire around first, so you've got some mechanical hold. You could pre-tin the ends first. So these are all things you can do if you're having trouble. But I've got a lot to do here and I'm a little bit lazy, so I'm going to do it this way. Keep in mind, doing it this lazy way means they can actually break off fairly easily. So if you do it this way, just make sure you don't go bending them around too much afterwards. It doesn't matter too much in the end, because once this is all locked up inside the joystick, it's not going to take too much force. I'm just going to hold this one in place. You can see the little wire there. Just going to hold it in place, heat it up. I've already got the little blob of solder on the iron there. Sorry about my fingers in the way. And that's done it. So this definitely isn't a soldering lesson, but that's not too bad. Alright, let's go ahead and do the rest in fast forward, eh? So I'm going to do this one other ground wire for my little single push button. Got to turn the soldering iron on. There we go. Just gently move that out of the way. Alright, now I've started putting little hooks on them just to hold them on a bit better. Yeah, that works a little bit better. So just if you, sorry about my finger there, if you wrap the hook around and then sort of tweezer it on, you'll have that mechanical strength of the wire holding it, not just relying on brittle solder joints. Also prevents them falling off when you're soldering, which is great as well. So don't worry if it takes you a few more tries than me. I've done this a few times before. Not that I'm that great at it. Alright, let's move on to our second hat switch. And I'm just going to do these ones in purple. Of course, the color doesn't make a difference. And they're all going down to the Pro Micro in the end anyway. I just like to use a few different colors. It's prettier that way. So the one thing I'm trying to do is not heat these up for too long, just so I don't melt the insides. The hat switches are actually pretty good about it. Those push buttons, you don't want to heat them up for too long, because I have had the cores in them shift a little bit if you heat them up for too long. Sorry about the wobbling camera there, got a bit clumsy. All right, last one on that hat switch. And we've just got one more on the push button. And like I said, don't heat this one up too much. If you find yourself taking a little bit too long to do it, back off, try again in a minute or two when it cools down, because those switches, they do overcook. Alright, now that we've done that, and refocus the camera, what we're going to do is just gently grab all these wires, and just put them all together. If they're sort of wrapped together in a central core, then whenever they get moved or jostled, they're sort of relying on each other, so you're less likely to rip a pin out. There we go. So there's a nice little brain stem. There's our Pro Micro. And let's just go ahead and start soldering these guys on. So I'm just going to put a bit of wood under there, just so I don't melt my little pad. Once I've got the camera focused, we can start soldering now. Ugh, that's more like it. Alright, so we've got a few of these to do, but let's do our ground wire first. Wires, I should say. So I'm just going to put a little blob of solder in each of these first. Now I can heat that up. Heat it up, feed the wire in, and we're good. Let's try again. Sorry about my fingers there. And one more. Nice. Alright, now skip 2 and 3, and do 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 9, and let's move straight on to A0, 15, 14, 16, 10, and just one at a time, solder these guys in. Now I actually get pretty messy here, so I apologize for that. You could probably keep these wires a lot nicer than what I have. And I think I didn't keep this to the same schematic as what I said before. So follow this or follow the original schematic. It doesn't matter too much. I think I've just used A0 instead of A4 here or A3. Alright, now we've got to squeeze in. We're running out of space there. Alright, so just get a bit of solder in there first. And these are the wires for my two push buttons for the grip. And the ground for that as well. So now that I've done those, we can go and actually connect the buttons once I focus the camera. Alright, so you can see I've stripped a long bit of wire off of there, and that's because I'm going to use that one wire to bridge these two buttons. So they're both going to ground, so we can just bridge them together. Now solder those guys in there. And finally, I'm just going to pre-tin these a little bit and then connect my two digital pins. Alright, now the last thing we have to do is connect our aircraft plug down the bottom. So I'm going to cut some wires first. And now I'm going to just pre-tin 2 and 3. I'm going to do green to number 3. Purple to number 2. Now I've got a bit of a red wire for my VCC and black for my ground. So there's VCC, which is 5 volts, and ground. And I'm just going to pre-tin all these connectors. So top left will be purple, top right will be green, bottom left will be black, bottom right red. Alright, now just gingerly put all this back together, tuck him away inside, and let's go ahead and connect that USB. Now from here you can go straight ahead and install the RR controller firmware and then start mapping it to a different address on the RR configurator app. So map it to 1 through 255, just not 0, because the one with the address 0 has to be our main one that the USB is finally going to be connected to in the base. But for those who want to see how the code works, they can go ahead and follow this, and I'll show you how to do a quick test just to get the inputs and make sure everything's connected properly. So first we just want to get the Pro Micro talking to us. So that's a serial.begin, and 115200 is our baud rate, our communication speed. And in the loop we're going to go serial.println and put the string hello in there. Semicolon breaks at the end of each of this line, and we're going to do a delay 5 just to slow the loop down a little bit. Now make sure your board is the Arduino Genuino Micro, and just go to Tools and check Port, and just make sure you've got the correct port chosen. Then you can push the Upload button, and now open up the serial monitor. And there it is, and you can see it's just saying hello to us. Do make sure that all your settings at the bottom there are connected the same as mine. So 115200 for the baud rate, and both carriage returns. So now we've got the Pro Micro talking to us. Let's go ahead and have it actually test the buttons. So I'm going to make an array and hold all our pin numbers. So those are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What were they again? 16, 14, 15, and then A0 through A3. So that's all the pins we're using, so now we can iterate through those with a nice little loop. So for int I equals 0, while I is less than, just count those pins, 14 pins, then I++. So that'll loop through each of those pins. So set the pin mode for the pins array each time I, and set them to input pull up. Then I'll copy that loop and put it in our main loop. And this time, instead of setting the pin mode, we're just going to print the current state of that pin. So we're going to do digital read on that pin. So pins number I. And I'm just going to put a little tab between each. And at the end, once it's given us all 14 of them, we'll do a carriage return with just an empty print line. So let's just put in some little notes so we know what everything is. So first we've got our array of input pins. We're going to activate our serial connection. Here we loop through each of our pins and set their pin mode to input pull up. And we're going to loop through each digital pin, get its state, and we're just going to say its state, then put a tab. Now let's update that. And use our serial monitor, and you see we're getting a lot of ones now. And let's just test some of these buttons. So you can see when I push this button, the 6th one is toggling to 0. And each and every switch and each direction on each of the hat switches should switch one of these ones to a 0. So this is a nice quick way you can go and check and make sure each of your connections is good. If you find one of your switches isn't giving you any result, we've either done the code wrong or you've got a wire loose somewhere. Alright, that looks like it all works to me. So you can either keep playing with that, or now you can go ahead and make sure you overwrite this and upload the RR controller firmware. Because this firmware works nicely, but it won't talk to RR configurator. So go and stick on a controller. Alright guys. So the next tutorial you want to follow if you're not sure what to do is how to use the RR configurator to set these guys up.